Before we dive in, tell me where you're listening from and what pulled you into this story. If it spoke to you, drop a comment. Your words help keep history's forgotten voices alive.
Lucrezia Borgia, the poisoned halo. Witch, seductress, murderess, or the most misunderstood woman of the Italian Renaissance? The girl born into darkness. Rome, 1480. A city where marble saints stare down at sinners, where cardinals whisper behind perfumed sleeves, and where poison flows more freely than holy water. The alleyways smell of incense, blood, and ambition. Every frescoed ceiling hides a secret. Every palace holds a corpse or two behind the drapery. And in the center of this gilded swamp, a child is born. Golden hair, clear eyes, a smile as bright as a saint's icon. Her name is Lucrezia Borgia, and before she can even speak, the world decides what she is. Temptation wrapped in silk, a weapon shaped like a woman, a daughter in a family where danger isn't an accident, it's a value system. But here's the part the storytellers always skip. Lucrezia wasn't born wicked, she was born watched. From the moment she toddled across a mosaic floor, the Vatican's most powerful men measured her like a political artifact, a future bargaining chip, a marriage treaty with curls. Even as a child, she lived inside a labyrinth of motives she would never fully escape. Her father, Rodrigo Borgia, charming, brilliant, corrupt to the bone, adored her with one hand and positioned her like a chess piece with the other. Her brother Cesare, the blade of the family, beautiful and terrifying, loved her fiercely, but saw the world as a battlefield where even a sister might become useful terrain. And hovering in the background were the enemies that surrounded every Borgia like flies around a feast. Imagine being 8 years old and already dangerous, not because of anything you've done, but because of the blood in your veins. Rome told stories about the Borgias, poison rings, secret tunnels, forbidden lovers, whispered murders. Most of them were lies, and the truth was often worse. And while the men carried daggers, armies, and cardinals' robes, Lucrezia carried something more potent: innocence painted as sin. She learned early that in Renaissance Italy, beauty was currency, charm was survival, and silence could keep you alive. She grew up in velvet rooms where the walls had ears, where servants disappeared overnight, where alliances shifted like the flicker of candlelight. She watched, she listened, she learned. By the time she could read, she understood something most adults never figure out. In a world ruled by men drunk on power, a woman's choices were illusions, but her influence could be lethal. Before she becomes the scandal, the myth, the seductress historians love to slander, she is a child navigating a palace built on treachery. And in a family where everyone's hands are dirty, the cleanest soul is always the easiest to blame. Lucrezia Borgia's story doesn't start with poison. It starts with survival. And survival, in Renaissance Rome, was the most dangerous art of all.
You don't understand Lucrezia Borgia until you understand the family that built her, broke her, and branded her. And the Borgias? They weren't just powerful, they were the earthquake beneath Italy's marble floors. The family the world loved to hate. Rome had seen corrupt families before, but nothing like the Borgias. They were outsiders, Spaniards muscling into Italian power like a foreign storm, and the old aristocratic families hated them for it. The Orsini, the Colonna, the Medici. They looked at the Borgias the way wolves look at an intruder stepping into their forest, with hostility sharpened into opportunity. But the Borgias didn't come to Rome to fit in, they came to rule it. At the head of this volcanic clan stood Rodrigo Borgia, Lucrezia's father. Charming enough to disarm a room, cunning enough to dismantle it afterward. A man who collected enemies the way other men collected prayer beads. He had children, many children, and what he lacked in conventional morality, he made up for in strategy. Cesare, the blade. Juan, the golden son. Geoffrey, the forgotten one. Lucrezia, the asset. From the outside, they looked like a scandal waiting to happen. From the inside, they looked like a dynasty being constructed brick by scheming brick. Rodrigo loved his children openly, a sin for a cardinal, then a pope.
and his enemies turned that love into ammunition. Lucrezia would pay for it her entire life. A childhood in the lion's den. Picture her at 7, long golden hair, a smile gentle enough to soften a cardinal's scowl, and an unconscious grace that made even her tutors whisper that she was destined for something. But destiny in the Borgia household wasn't a blessing, it was a weapon. She was educated like a noble son, rare for girls of the era. Languages, music, diplomacy, poetry. She learned to read people even faster than she read scripture. While other little girls practiced embroidery, Lucrezia practiced survival. She learned early that a whispered rumor could kill faster than poison, that a smile could disarm a rival, that a marriage contract could topple a city. All before she reached adolescence. She was growing up not in a family, but in a political ecosystem.
When her father became pope, everything changed. In 1492, Rodrigo Borgia won the papacy. He became Pope Alexander VI, and Rome lost its last excuse for decency. With his election, the Vatican transformed overnight. Not a spiritual sanctuary, a fortress of Borgia ambition. Courtiers scrambled to curry favor. Foreign kings wrote letters dripping with honey and threats. Gold flowed like wine. And in the middle of this chaos was Lucrezia, now the daughter of the most powerful man on earth, and therefore the most valuable female bargaining chip in Italy. But here's the twisted part. Rodrigo adored her, truly, fiercely, unapologetically. And in his world, love and usefulness were the same thing. Becoming the perfect Borgia asset. By the time she turned 11, Lucrezia knew she was no ordinary girl. She was being polished like a gemstone, not for jewelry, but for war. Her father and brothers consulted marriage prospects the way generals discuss troop deployment. She was beautiful, educated, well-mannered, obedient, young enough to be shaped, valuable enough to change alliances. Every kingdom wanted a piece of the Vatican, and Lucrezia was the price of admission. She didn't choose the game, but she learned its rules better than anyone expected. The girl becomes the Borgia bargaining chip, and history, not yet satisfied, sharpens its knives. You can't understand Lucrezia Borgia without understanding what it means to be married off at 13 in Renaissance Italy. Not for love, not for family, not even for politics exactly. For survival, someone else's, never hers. The innocent pawn. Because when the Borgias arranged a marriage, people didn't gossip about dresses or dowries. They whispered about alliances, territory, armies, threats, and who was about to be destroyed. Lucrezia, barely past childhood, became a Borgia instrument, forged for the precise moment Rome needed leverage. And the moment had come. A child wearing a woman's fate. Her husband-to-be? Giovanni Sforza, Lord of Pesaro, a member of one of the most powerful families in northern Italy. Why him? Because the Sforzas controlled territory the Borgias needed, because they were fierce, wealthy, and well-connected. Because the Borgias wanted to send a message, align with us or be crushed. Giovanni was 26, Lucrezia was 13. She walked into the marriage as radiantly polite as she'd been taught, draped in gold brocade, her hair braided in the Borgia colors, red and yellow, symbolizing blood and flame. The wedding was glorious. Rome congratulated the Pope. The cardinals cheered. Crowds gathered in the piazzas. But if you looked closely at the bride, really looked, you'd see her hands trembling under her silk sleeves. She didn't know Giovanni. She didn't love him. She didn't choose him. She didn't choose anything. She was playing a role she didn't yet understand. Still, she performed it perfectly. The Borgia daughter becomes the Sforza wife. The moment she crossed the threshold with Giovanni, Lucrezia stepped into a world far from the Vatican splendor she grew up in. Pesaro was colder, harder, filled with unfamiliar courtiers who watched her for weakness. But here's the truth. No scandalmonger ever bothered writing down. Lucrezia was good at being a wife. She was kind, gentle,
intelligent, soft-spoken, but increasingly aware of her value. Her letters show a young woman trying desperately to build a life. But marriages in Renaissance Italy weren't built on affection. They were built on utility. And Giovanni Sforza was about to become useless. When the alliance turns sour, the Borgias were ruthless, but they weren't stupid. They knew alliances changed faster than loyalties. By 1496, the Sforza family, once powerful, was becoming irrelevant. Pope Alexander VI no longer needed Giovanni. Worse, Giovanni was drifting toward political enemies. That made him dangerous. And dangerous men don't get to stay married to Borgia daughters. Rodrigo and Cesare had a solution, of course. One as brutal as it was brilliant. Annul the marriage. But to do that, to humiliate the Sforza family publicly, they needed a justification so shocking it would force everyone to look away. So the Vatican declared Giovanni Sforza was impotent. Impotent. A dagger to a nobleman's masculinity, a humiliation worse than death. Giovanni exploded. He shouted betrayal. He hurled accusations at the Borgia men, but he saved his sharpest knife for Lucrezia. The birth of the lie that would haunt her forever. Giovanni, furious and cornered, began to whisper a rumor that spread like a plague. Lucrezia slept with her father. Lucrezia slept with her brother Cesare. There was no evidence, no witnesses, no letters, nothing but a wounded man's pride. And yet, like all good lies, it stuck. Not because people believed Giovanni, but because the world was already primed to believe anything monstrous about the Borgias. Rome hated foreign families. Rome hated powerful women. Rome hated beauty in the hands of someone who wasn't born to wield it. Lucrezia became the perfect symbol, a girl punished for being born into a family men adored, hating. The incest rumor would cling to her name for centuries, long after the men who invented it turned to dust. The girl caught in the crossfire. Lucrezia didn't fight back. What could she do? When a 13-year-old girl is accused of seducing two of the most powerful men in Christendom, the accusation isn't about truth, it's about control. Her voice didn't matter. Her innocence didn't matter. Her devastation didn't matter. She became a mirror for the world's fantasies and fears. In public, she stayed composed. In private, her letters show heartbreak, confusion, and a genuine attempt to remain loyal to both families. But loyalty is a luxury pawns don't get to keep. When the marriage was officially annulled, Giovanni, the weapon. The annulment of her first marriage didn't end Lucrezia's usefulness. It cleared the board. The Borgias weren't ashamed. They weren't worried about gossip. They weren't interested in defending Lucrezia's innocence. They were interested in winning. And to win, they needed a sharper blade, a new alliance, a new husband, one that would strengthen their grip on Italy. Lucrezia, now 16, walked back into the Vatican not as a girl broken by scandal, but as a vessel ready to be filled with new purpose. Because in the Borgia family, nothing is wasted, especially not beauty, charm, or a daughter with a famous face. This time, the stakes are higher. Her second husband was no middle-tier lord, no pawn, no stepping stone. He was Alfonso of Aragon, Duke of Biseglie, charismatic, noble, brave, and dangerously close to being the kind of man Lucrezia could fall for. And she did. Alfonso wasn't cold like Giovanni. He was warm. He was proud. He was handsome in a way Renaissance painters loved, a mix of boyish appeal and princely arrogance. He actually liked Lucrezia. He admired her. He listened to her. And she, a girl who had grown up surrounded by men who used her, didn't know what to do with a man who treated her like a person. Their marriage, unlike her first, began with something shocking: affection. The Vatican's golden couple. Rome adored them. The Vatican fed on their youth, their beauty, their charm. They became the Borgia family's most dazzling display. A prince of Naples, a daughter of the Pope. A union meant to solidify power from the Papal States to the Kingdom of Naples. Every banquet showed them smiling. Every procession featured them arm in arm. Every painter begged to capture them on canvas. And for a brief moment, one rare golden moment, Lucrezia Borgia tasted happiness. She finally had something of her own: love. Lucrezia begins to understand power. This marriage changed her. She wasn't just a pawn anymore. She was a connector, a negotiator, a political force wrapped in satin. Her father trusted her. Her brother Cesare confided in her. Foreign diplomats sought her approval. At night, her husband praised her wit, not her looks. He admired her mind. Lucrezia began to see what she could be, if the world ever let her choose. Not a victim, not a weapon, not a pawn, not a rumor, but a ruler. Her letters from this time show a girl blossoming into a woman with ambition. Not cruel ambition, but purposeful ambition. She could have been magnificent. But magnificence requires safety, and safety is the one thing the Borgia world never gave her.
Cesare Borgia changes everything. Cesare loved his sister. That part is true. But Cesare was also a man with one goal: conquer Italy. And in his ruthless march toward absolute power, he saw Alfonso as an obstacle. The Kingdom of Naples was weakening, its alliances shifting, its usefulness diminishing. Alfonso, once an asset, had become a liability. And Cesare Borgia didn't allow liabilities to live. The first attack came in the night. Alfonso stabbed on the steps of St. Peter's, left bleeding in the shadows. Lucrezia found him, screaming, begging doctors to save him. They tried. They bandaged him. They stitched him. They prayed. For days he clung to life, and Lucrezia never left his side. She slept sitting up, her head resting against the post of his bed, holding Alfonso's hand, while the Vatican whispered around them. Cesare visited the room often. He stood at the bedside with cold, assessing eyes. Lucrezia flinched every time he entered. She knew. She wasn't naive anymore. The murder in the bedchamber. And then it happened. In August 1500, while Lucrezia was briefly absent, Cesare's men entered Alfonso's room. They strangled him with a silk cord, the favored murder weapon of noble assassins. Silent, efficient, easily denied. When Lucrezia returned, her husband, her only real love, was dead. The Vatican called it a sudden illness. Rome called it what it was, a Borgia execution. Lucrezia called it the end of the part of her life where she believed she could ever be safe. The transformation begins. Grief does strange things to people. For Lucrezia, grief became clarity. She stopped crying, stopped pleading, stopped hoping. She began planning. If the world was going to treat her like a weapon, she would become one. But not for the Borgias, for herself. Lucrezia learned how to navigate Vatican politics without being swallowed by them. She learned how to charm men without trusting them, how to negotiate without revealing her intentions. She became sharper, quieter, more decisive. This was the turning point. Lucrezia Borgia stopped being a Borgia pawn. She became a Borgia player. And the next alliance would not be chosen for her. It would be chosen with her, and it would change everything. The part where the world thinks it knows her, and the part where Lucrezia quietly proves them wrong. After Alfonso's murder, Lucrezia didn't break. She calcified. She had learned the most brutal lesson a woman could learn in Renaissance Italy. Love was a liability. But survival? Survival was a skill. The survivor. And Lucrezia had been forced to master it since childhood. The Vatican world had become unlivable. Every frescoed hall held memories of Alfonso's blood. Every soft word from Cesare
carried a threat she could now hear clearly. So the Borgias did what they always did when a scandal risked boiling over. They married her off again. Only this time, Lucrezia wasn't a frightened girl. She wasn't even a hopeful wife. She was a woman who understood exactly what kind of world she lived in, and what she needed to do to outlive it. Enter Alfonso d'Este, the man and the court that didn't want her. Her third husband was Alfonso d'Este, heir to the powerful Duchy of Ferrara, a cultured, proud, deeply suspicious Italian family who had absolutely no desire to welcome a Borgia into their home. To the Este family, Lucrezia wasn't a bride. She was a scandal packaged in silk. They had heard every rumor. Poisoner, seductress, incestuous, a woman whose husbands had a habit of dying, a father who was the most corrupt pope in history, a brother who murdered openly and smiled while doing it. Ferrara expected Lucrezia to arrive with a dagger hidden in her bodice and poison stitched into her hem. They prepared for a monster. Instead, they got a woman who walked into their court with grace so disarming it unsettled everyone. Lucrezia stepped into Ferrara like someone determined to build a new life, brick by brick, with steady hands that no longer trembled. She came with jewels, status, and a new political dowry, yes, but also with a calm strength that Ferrara didn't know how to resist. Reputation versus reality. Ferrara watched her with narrowed eyes at first. They expected tantrums, manipulation, drama, Borgia, chaos. What they got was poise, competence, genuine kindness, diplomatic brilliance, unexpected humility, and a woman who could charm a room without even trying. Lucrezia attended mass, sponsored poets, comforted the sick, resolved disputes among servants, mediated arguments between nobles, and gradually, astonishingly, won over an entire court that had prepared to hate her. It was slow, careful work, the work of a woman rebuilding her name from ashes. Ferrara began to see it. They began to whisper the truth quietly, almost sheepishly. She's nothing like the rumors. Even Alfonso, who had been cold and distant at first, found himself drawn in. No matter how much people tried to paint her as sin personified, Lucrezia Borgia had something that couldn't be forged, a warmth that made people feel seen. Ferrara expected a villain. They got a duchess.
Death and legacy. Lucrezia Borgia didn't die with poison in her hand. She didn't die seducing kings or plotting murders in candlelit corridors. She didn't die in scandal or disgrace or defiance. She died quietly, gently, humanly. And somehow, that's the part of the story people always forget. The final years, a woman made of silk and sorrow. By her late 30s, Lucrezia had begun to withdraw from Ferrara's glittering world. She immersed herself in religion. She wore simpler garments. She sought quiet instead of courtly spectacle. She found solace in charity, tending to the poor and the sick with her own hands. Motherhood had softened her. Loss had hollowed her. Age, rare for a woman who lived through 3 political marriages, had finally begun tempering her fire. Her letters grow more introspective, more poetic, more tired. The world saw a duchess. Inside, she was a woman praying for peace. Death at 39, the final undoing. In 1519, after a difficult childbirth, Lucrezia fell violently ill. Fever, weakness, infection. The same story that had ended so many women's lives in the Renaissance. This time, it was her story too. She died at 39, younger than most queens, older than most Borgias. Her final words, according to the nuns who tended her, were whispered prayers for her children. No scheming, no seduction, no poison. Just a woman who had survived a world determined to break her. How the world remembered her. The lie wins the first round. The moment she died, the myth-making began. The dead can't defend themselves, and the living rarely bother to defend a woman. So playwrights, poets and rivals sharpened their quills. Lucrezia the poisoner, Lucrezia the seductress, Lucrezia the incestuous temptress,
Lucrezia the femme fatale of Rome. Every rumor her enemies invented became part of the legend. Her kindness? Forgotten. Her competence? Ignored. Her political skill? Erased. History loves a monster, especially when that monster is beautiful, female, and conveniently unable to argue. What actually happened? The truth bleeds through. Modern historians did something revolutionary. They bothered to look. They found no evidence she poisoned anyone, no evidence she committed adultery, no evidence of incest, no evidence of criminal behavior at all. Instead, they found business records proving she managed Ferrara's economy, diplomatic letters showing she negotiated peace, personal correspondence revealing warmth, grief, longing, court accounts praising her generosity and intelligence. The real Lucrezia Borgia wasn't a villain. She was a survivor, shaped by men who never expected her to become anything more than a bargaining chip. And when she became more, they punished her in memory.
The woman behind the myth, her real legacy. Lucrezia's legacy is not poison or scandal. It's perseverance. It's the quiet, steady power of a woman who was born into corruption, was traded like a trinket, was blamed for sins she never committed, was slandered by enemies, was rewritten by history, and still forged a life of meaning. Ferrara loved her. Her children adored her. Artists honored her. Diplomats trusted her. And the people she ruled saw her as just, generous, and humane. The myth calls her wicked. The truth shows her wounded, brilliant, and unbreakable. The final question. So ask yourself, who was more dangerous? Lucrezia Borgia, a woman trying to survive the ambitions of powerful men, or the world that turned her into a monster because it feared a woman who survived too well? Her story ends in a quiet convent, yes, but her legend still walks through history with a poisoned halo. A halo she never asked for, never wanted, and never deserved.
As the shadows lengthen and the stars begin to whisper, we close the pages of this ancient tale. In the hush of night, truth rests where faith once stood strong. Sleep gently now, wrapped in the echoes of empires long gone. Until next time, when darkness falls and another lullaby of a fallen world begins.